Welcome to the podcast with Neetal Parekh. Some people build businesses, but Neetal builds the stories that make businesses matter. An attorney by education and a digital content strategist by training, Neetal has built her career around one question. How do you turn the complex ideas of social enterprise into narratives that people can understand, feel, and act on? As founder and CEO of Innov8social, she has answered through every medium. Her Amazon bestseller, 51 Questions on Social Entrepreneurship, turns complex principles and practices of social entrepreneurship into accessible, question driven narratives. Through the Impact podcast, she gives social innovators a platform to tell their stories. She is also the creator of Impactathon, an immersive event that combines talks, collaborative problem solving, and networking to help participants move social impact ideas forward. Perhaps the clearest proof is the Pineapple Friends, a children's book series that teaches design thinking, prototyping, and pitching through story. For more than a decade, Neetal has shown that the right story at the right platform can move an idea from just a concept to impact, which is exactly the kind of conversation Fetus exists to explore. So join me in welcoming Neetal Parekh. Good evening. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you, Vedant.
Wonderful to see you. Wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time to come today. So, what happened was that I recently attended an AI arbitrage webinar. So, basically, what that is that you have AI running all your business, and you make your own digital products, or you sell somebody else's digital products on your AI generated business. It's as simple as that. But what this guy did was he invited people to his workshop where he spent the next 1.5 hours just to tell his story. Why he's doing what he's doing, what is it that he's doing, how it's going to happen, how can it be replicated by masses, and finally he was selling his course. But when he was selling his course, at the end of it, I found myself in a very tough spot. I was going to make a decision of whether or not to buy a course which costs me around $1,500 from a person that I have just known in the past 1.5 hours. But the feeling that I was getting was that if I don't buy this course, perhaps I'm not courageous enough to take the next step, or that I'm not committed towards my own goals, or that I'm losing out on an opportunity that I have. So, none of this that I felt is an actual assessment of the product or the course that he was selling. It was an assessment about myself in relation to that product or in general. So that made me wonder, what did this guy do in the past 1.5 hours to me, which made me question myself instead of focusing on questioning the product? I'm questioning myself. And what is the future of this kind of technology? So, this is what I want to explore with you today. And I would like to start by asking, what is your story and how does storytelling shape the work that you do today?
Absolutely. Well, I think that's such a powerful story to start our conversation on storytelling because so much of how we communicate is story, whether it's with our friends, whether it's at school or university or in business. And this was a business persuasive storytelling session. And if we were to look at the elements of it being in a space chosen by by the person in that, with a finite time, there are so many elements that created a pressure around that story. But yeah, I think even for me, my life is a collection, like everyone, of stories. But I have always been drawn to reading and writing, and I think as I've become in the professional space, both in university, studying law, starting my own business, doing workshops, writing stories, there's this through line of how do we create stories from the experiences that we have. And I think it is through that process of storytelling that, one, it helps us make sense of our own lives, our own path, because very rarely do we actually truly have a linear path. I think every path is actually nonlinear, but it's through the narrative that we create that creates the linear path. It creates a structure by which we can understand and share our story, but the person that we're sharing it with can also digest it. So for me as well, I moved a lot growing up. I've had a non-linear path in law and business, in storytelling, but it all makes sense when I'm able to tell it as a story. This happened, but then this happened, and then this happened. And so yeah, so I'm excited. I'm so excited that we get to just spend this time and talk about storytelling because it is so essential. And anyone that says, oh, this doesn't apply to me, but it does, because we are all storytellers and we're all story receivers. Storytelling has predated the written word. That is how communication has happened across culture, across time. So I think studying it, especially in this time of AI, the when stories may not be created by people, but by machines. I think it's a really perfect time to talk about stories. So
You said that creating a narrative is something that everybody does, with their non-linear experiences, and align all of that to form a narrative, to form some sense. But why is it so effective in general for businesses especially? And are there any structures and principles that make it work?
yeah, that's great. So if I were to rattle off features and benefits of a product or a program, there's a chance that, eyes would glaze over, we would just get bored. But if I say, hey, let me tell you a story, our bodies are built are to kind of receive stories. So because inherent in saying that there's a structure, like there's a point, there's a plot there, so I think that works really well because it creates a common expectation of what's going to happen there. It may not happen, it may fall below expectation, but it creates that experience, and that way we can take that structure and take it to any field, and there is something known about it. So I think that's why in business storytelling it's really effective, because you may not be telling a fiction story which has a traditional plot, but there is a plot. There is the structure of a context, some characters, or and even if characters are abstract, some tension, some climax, and the denouement, some kind of conclusion or resolution. And through using this, we can have a common way of talking about many things. And when the facts are compelling or personal, it can draw the listener in. It can create a sense of trust, whether earned or unearned. But those things can happen in the form and in the format of story.
Do you have any structures and formats that you'd like to share which actually delivers this?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at different genres of even fiction, if you look at like a murder mystery or something, or something that you can see that there are these common structures that happen. So I think um within any space or field, you'll find some common structures. I would like to look at the pitch, because that's something that, with some of the work I do around social entrepreneurship, we talk about pitch, and pitch is really storytelling. So with that, we often say we'll talk about the problem first, and then we'll talk about a solution. And the reason is, as we contextualize an issue that maybe starts with a very specific problem in the social impacts realm. It may be something like a social issue. It may be a personal issue that someone has faced, but when they contextualize it with some statistics, it becomes, you share that issue with the listener, and now it's their issue. You give it to them to hold. Now they're holding this, they're feeling the tension of it. Then when you have your next slide and you talk about the solution, you have now helped resolve or alleviate the tension, and maybe now you create a sense of urgency of both the problem and maybe the solution if there's some emerging technology. And then looking at the breadth of it, the size of this issue, and the model of how you will grow. So through this way, there is this common, if you're listening to pitch competition, you can listen to 100 pitches, and probably they will have a somewhat similar structure. So I think as the listener, it can kind of create a sense of ease because you're no longer looking for something new and unique structure wise. You're actually able to focus on the content, and what they're saying and how effectively they're and persuasively they're saying that. So that's really a story structure. Is a pitch is really a form of a story told with certain constraints. So,
Okay. One thing that I noticed was that there are steps to be taken for anything to happen. So consumers have said that you do this, this, and then you'll see results. But in order to actually have that ingrained in the structure, I see that there are some steps which have a nested nature to them, but they are leveled as if they are equivalent to the other steps which are following it or preceding it. So something as simple as you go to an AI website, pay them their subscription, you make a website, simple, just prompt, ChatGPT prompt, make a website. Now, then they say that the next step is to market it. And then the next step is that you will see results and something like that. I'm just being hypothetical. But the weight of each of these steps is not equivalent. The marketing step is a very tedious step in itself. It is a nested process. There is a lot of thing that goes within it, and there is a lot of unpredictability involved. So let's say you're talking about social media marketing. It's not just how determined you are to post every day. It is how effective your posts are, whether you're using strategic thumbnails, where are you posting, what are you posting, and where, what are the algorithms. So it's very unpredictable. Yet because it's being incorporated in a story structure where there has to be clarity of actions that have to be taken, there have to be clear milestones, it seems as though it is as simple as the other steps. That is where I sometimes feel that we are sold values that go bypass the actual explanation of how things are going to happen, which we need to know in the first place in order to actually be convinced. So oftentimes we are not even sure what we don't know. So that is one observation I wanted to share. Do you, if there is anything else, maybe you could give some example, if possible, of some product or some kind of a pitch as you were talking about, and what would make it effective, what would kind of really throw people off, something like that, so that we can just get a tangible feeling of
yeah,
it. Yeah.
absolutely. One of my favorite social enterprises when I first started Innov8social was Back to the Roots. They are an incredible story of they created these artisanal mushrooms made by using spent coffee grounds that you can get for free if you go to like a coffee shop. They are throwing those grounds away, and they use that to incubate like mushroom spores, and then from that they were able to create. These were two college students at the time that they heard one of their professors mention this, and then they did it over spring break, and then they had these beautiful artisanal mushrooms. They took them over to Whole Foods, and they were like, wow, this is, people pay a lot of money for these mushrooms. And then they ended up creating a social enterprise. They're still, both of the founders are still very active in that. They've expanded it to creating like local food resources, and they're really passionate about the social impact and teaching kids how to farm and create, generate their own food. And they got into aquaponics for a while, but I think their story is so compelling. And I went to a number of events where I would hear these two young guys talk about how they spent their spring break, growing these mushrooms that turn out to be, and all from waste material. And that's another really beautiful thing about their story, is that their raw material was waste, and then they created this something that was so nutritious and so artisanal. So I think in that story, there's so many things that are compelling, right? And I think one of the things that is really effective in a founder story, and that was what they were invited by the Obama White House to come. They were like those poster children of social enterprise. They really embodied it because, they learned about this thing. They took a step. So I think that they really. But their story was so compelling. But the other part, and to their credit, is how they decided to share that story. They would starting with a common, idea of like, oh, you hear an idea, and you hear someone say this thing, and then you decide to try it yourself. So you're kind of identifying with the audience. You're saying, I didn't know about this either, just like you don't know about this, and then we tried this, we thought we would fail, and then this happened, and then this happened, then we took it, we found it was useful. So I'm sure when they did it, it wasn't as linear of a process, but now as they tell the story, they can tell it in incrementally. And one thing that they can do that is really valuable, which I think maybe happened in your session, is that they can raise an issue that the listener may have, and then they can resolve it in the guise of the story, right? So, they could say, well, we didn't think this would work either, because probably as a listener, you're thinking, I don't really think from coffee, I don't think that, and then they can kind of raise that and then dismiss it. So I think that is a way that they can also build trust, but also make you feel like, oh, they addressed something that you had an objection, or you had a hesitation or an issue, and then they addressed it, and so now you feel like, oh, we're the same. We're building this trust. So for them, I mean, it's been built on something that is so true and so resonant in what they've continued to build and the impact they've continued to make. But that structure can also be used, in a way that is not as that is not as authentic, or is not as by raising something that you've and then dismissing it, and then trying to get to some sale or get to some action point, or make someone feel like they may miss out, so, but the structure, I think, is somewhat similar, it is, and that is, something that if we start spotting some of those tropes, or these structures, or these templates, it doesn't make the story less effective. It makes us more aware that we are receiving stories, and that can help us to be more discerning, because that same story, that same structure, now let's say is used in elderly, used with elderly populations to scam, right? Like you kind of say, oh, like, yeah, I also have this thing, or I'm really in this difficult situation, or something like that, that can create this shared sense of um, kind of burden or something in that. But here, the solution lies with the person, and if they were to just click on this thing or share their details or whatever that is, but they must be able to build a base level of strength to even, or like a trust, to be able to kind of proceed to make an ask, And I think one thing that is true for many stories, especially in the business realm, is that there is an ask. That's as similar as a pitch. Maybe a fiction story isn't having the same ask. It may be asking us to reflect on something or consider something. But once we get into the business or pitching, there is an ask. And I think that's when we have to be aware, because that ask may be something that we are teeing ourselves up for, but may not be aligned with our true values, or, what maybe we actually want is in our best interest.
You mentioned something very interesting. You mentioned tension, creating tension. And I'm sure this is not the tension in the sense in which you make somebody tense. It's about how you engage somebody and create that tension, as in a rope knot. It's like a tension. So, um, would you like to explore ways in which that tension can be created in this kind of storytelling? How is it created? How am I actually hooked to it? I understand that there are things that I can identify with, that okay, these guys did not know it, their professor introduced it. Similarly, there is something that, yeah, even I didn't know it. But after that point of relatability, how does it become something that can influence a consumer's identity and self concept? So it's a huge shift in a very short period of time. It's a lot of effective structure that's actually at play there. And the most important way to have that structure manifest itself in terms of immediate impact on consumers or whoever is watching the story is through that tension. So, would you like to explore how this tension is created?
Yes, tension is it's a common sense of discomfort, and it can be so effective in storytelling. So this is a great little anecdote that may be helpful. I believe that when the Gates Foundation was addressing malaria in one of their speeches, there was this idea that malaria is carried by insects, by mosquitoes, and it can be it can affect so many people, and many people maybe in countries where that's not affected in this kind of in this whatever event or conference. So I believe they had like a glass jar of mosquitoes, and that they released them, and they said some percentage of these have malaria. Just that's reflective of what you may find in a country that is dealing with malaria. Now, this is a very physical way to create discomfort. Someone who is just listening and is not part of it suddenly says that there's a mosquito that is carrying malaria that I may now be impacted by, and so then when you say there is a vaccine or there's a solution, that is literally like relieving some tension, or so, so I think that is a physical way, but metaphorically we can create that tension, by using statistics or using this, even a framing of what if we do nothing. If you mention an issue that is pervasive in the community, or maybe environmental or social impact wise, and you say, if we do nothing in 5 years, X number of people will be impacted by this, or exponentially it will change. The coral reefs. I watched a documentary, and they were saying there's a point of no return where if we have shifted the coral reefs so much and their habitats and their ability, we cannot come back. So I think those things create a common sense of discomfort, and that tension in storytelling is actually important. You don't want to make your audience or listeners or the group receiving your story too comfortable, because you want them to be at the edge of their seat, to be anticipating the solution that you are working on, that you're presenting, and I think you want them to be ready for a solution. So if you have not built an issue or enough tension, what comes next is going to feel not important, and so I think that's that's the work of us as storytellers, or if we're pitching, is to make something relevant to the person listening enough that they might feel like that they may physically be impacted by it. So yeah.
Today we are surrounded by stories of this kind who are trying to engage us, which are trying to create that tension in us, and it's like overwhelming. We are overwhelmed by so many choices. I wanted to know, because you also have legal training, and part of that, I think, is to actually dig deeper into a premise so that you can actually see whether it's true or not. What is the truth? Basically, you kind of get a grip of the real facts behind things, given a narrative that's presented at the forefront. What advice would you like to give consumers for distinguishing between stories that offer genuine value compared to the ones which have this appearance of value? And could you give us some very critical questions that one can actually ask and dig deeper into knowing whether this is actually having a real value proposition, or is it just throwing the structure on my face?
Yeah, that's a great point. And in the field of social entrepreneurship in many countries, including the United States, it is a term of art that no one has. You have not registered with the government. You have not had to prove you're a social enterprise. So that can lead to this idea of greenwashing, where you're using the terms, you're maybe using some graphics that look aligned with social impact, but you really aren't. So I think that is a great point. They call that the conscious consumer, that is maybe willing to even pay more or look longer to find a product aligned with their values. But we also have to be a critical consumer. We have to look dig a little deeper. Many companies have impact reports. And so I think when it comes to story, it is that critical mindset. Then we have to maybe have that. We can't assume that everything we're hearing is correct. So I think asking the question why is a great starting point, and that's one of the focus of the first book in the children's book series, Pineapple Friends, is asking why. Because as we dig in and we ask, why are you why do you say like that this is a solution or that's a problem, and if we keep asking the question why, we get deeper into understanding the layer below, and so we don't need to take at face value the results or the premise that the storyteller has told us. So I think anytime, especially if there's an ask for us, there's a pitch, there's an ask for us as in the audience, we should always be asking those questions like why, and that's why pitches are designed for investors to often to seek investment, but those investors are trained to find the jugular, to find the most weak point of your story, of your pitch, and then really focus on that. So we are all receivers of stories. So we can all kind of look for what is the weak point, or can we ask why a few more times, and what will be the response, and that way it puts it the storyteller has finished their story. They have created tension, they have resolved the tension, they have asked us for something, and it feels like that's the end of the story. But really, now we get to ask them, but why, and then kind of put that back on them to answer those questions. And maybe from the responses to those questions, we may start discerning whether they are authentic, whether they're credible. But we are not required to take the story at face value and end there. That is not, as a listener, we are active in the listening process, and we can ask we can ask questions, especially if there's an ask of us or a pitch. I think it's the onus is on us to do that.
Okay, so you mentioned asking why a couple of times. There is a point after which asking why becomes something like just for the sake of it. There is like you why you can go. It's
Yes,
an
yes.
infinite regress. So is there a strategy to know what kind of a why am I asking?
Yeah, and that's great. I think that's a perfect question to ask, because why is also very nuanced. Because if you ask a child and they just ask why, they're not really, first of all, it'll get old fast. It'll be hard to, but I think why can also be why not. It's really just asking with curiosity. What will move that conversation or inquiry further? And sometimes the question is not why, but why is a nice placeholder. It's broad. A lot of times we may want to ask why not, because that's the correct question. If someone says this is how this has always been, and we don't want to change, but why not? Like, why not is the right question. Why may not elicit what we want. So I think um, just like a storyteller is skilled, as a listener, an active listener, we must also build the skills, because, and it may happen through trial and error. We ask some questions, we realize, oh, we're just keep hitting the same wall. We're not getting further. Then we must try a new tact, and it may involve even repeating or agreeing with some part as the premise, saying, okay, is this, I agree with you, or this premise you mentioned. Now I wanted to dig deeper, and then you select the right question to do that. So it's also an art, to ask questions, to be curious. This is, great interviewers, great reporters. They find they can find their way to ask the right question in the right way to the right person, to to move the story further, or to dig a little deeper. So I think um, we are responsible as well as listeners, being listeners, to ask questions. And why is just a nice umbrella. It keeps it, if we ask what or how, the storyteller may be able to fall back into the benefits and the features, and we may not dig deeper to understand more, if we should be involved in their story. They're asking something from us, but do we is it the right fit for us,
Yeah, I really am intrigued by this question of why, because most of the times as people who are listening to somebody pitching, we are we have not done the same thing before in life. We are not experienced in it. We are being sold something that we are going to experience perhaps for the very first time. So we might not exactly be as aware as an investor or perhaps a journalist as to where the loopholes might be. So would it be possible to have kind of like an example of, let's say, somebody pitching something, and or perhaps identifying a problem, or how can we exactly use this tool of why? And I just want to see how it works. If it
yeah, yeah. um So I'll just mention in the kids' book, actually, one of the things that they are looking at is they are looking at why there is pollution in the waterway, and in so there is pollution in this waterway, and that leads to two of the characters not being able to take their swim test to become lifeguards. So you can practice that with me if you like, or we can do that inquiry and see kind of where we landed, because this was something in the book that went through many iterations to get to a simple, because I in a way I realized as a storyteller I have to kind of create that way to say why. Like there's so many, that it's not always natural, like I said, to always ask why. So we had to work it a few different angles before it made sense. This that it made and it contributed to the narrative. And I realized that's when I realized it really is an art, and you have to start. And sometimes the easiest way is asking why, but we had to kind of make the story in a way that the why was the question, because that was the way that was the simplest way to introduce it. And then I hope as kids read it, and as they become more skilled at asking questions, they will be more prepared to ask other questions. But the inquiry was the same. So if you want to practice it with that one, we can use that as an example, and it can walk us through the whys.
Yeah, of course, of course. If you
Yeah.
wanna.
Yeah, so in that one, so there was that. So these characters went up and talked to the ranger, and they asked, "Why is that happening?" And then the next level of response was, "Well, um,
I'm so sorry. Could you please repeat what was happening?
yes, there was water. I mean, there was pollution or debris in the waterways that was clogging up those waterways, such that it was not swimmable. It was not. And this actually happens sometimes with stormwater runoff, and it can happen, those things. So then their inquiry was why, and so they said, he said, well, there is uh, the landfill overflows when it rains, and the debris kind of goes down the river. So why does that happen? And then the kind of thing, the thing is that we throw away more things than we recycle, or that actually get recycled. So it kind of comes down to, in their exploration, they kind of realize the issue is not necessarily the debris in the water. It's that when it comes to the moment that we throw something away, we don't necessarily know whether we're throwing it away or recycling it correctly, and our lack of knowledge leads to this accumulate, and and we don't know if we can fix it, repair it, and not put it into the pathway of landfill. So that leads them, rather than trying to just focus on the trash, to look at the behavior of, like, the people, when for us, when we are literally throwing something away. And if they were to ask why further, we could say, well, our materials, even though we know they're going to be thrown away, they're not made in a biodegradable way. Like, I always look at the banana peel. What a perfect banana peel! It's such a perfect container, right? Like, it protects the banana, and when we're done, it will eventually become composted. But why is it that if we have a cup from a coffee shop, that doesn't happen? Or the protein bar that we have, and that we maybe carry around, and have, and then utilize for such a short time, and then that wrapper has plastic and will now never biodegrade. So that becomes the next level of inquiry. So I feel like as we dive deeper, those whys are more compelling. They are more time consuming and maybe challenging to solve, because you could do a beach cleanup and clean those debris up, but to design a material that biodegrades the way that banana peels do, and that has a shelf life, that is not as easy, right? So the why can lead us down a path, but it is still a valuable journey to go on, but it can lead us down a path that gets to the root cause analysis, which I believe, as social entrepreneurs, that is ultimately what we're trying to do. We don't want to solve symptoms only. We may need to solve symptoms because we need the immediate cleanliness of a space, but over time, we want to be looking at those root causes and trying to find solutions there.
So this is very interesting because I think storytelling is exactly where this fits, because people are actually facing the symptom, and that is what needs to be that is what they relate with one another, which is the effect of the symptom. But to actually make them travel back to the cause, the real cause, is where storytelling bridges that gap, because you have done that in a non-linear way, which you cannot take everybody to your journey back in time. So you have to actually kind of perhaps just extract the salient points out of it, make it something like a linear journey so that they can fast forward into the actual why,
Mm.
which is causing the whole, domino effect of the symptom that is actually happening. And there is where you convince them that the why that I have found perhaps is the highest stake why to the problem that I'm trying to solve, which is what we all relate with, which is the symptom.
Yes, exactly. You totally have got symptoms we can spot. The symptoms can lead us to the root cause because the root cause is often complicated, complex, generational, geographically specific. We cannot spot it, but we can spot the symptom, and that can give us the breadcrumb to follow to lead us to that deeper inquiry and the root cause. And then as we go to solve, like I think we want to really work on those challenging solutions, innovative solutions that solve for the root cause, but then can also, address the symptoms. So I'll give you one example of a real social enterprise that's so interesting. Tom's Shoes has the model of buy one give one. That's how they were founded by the founder. Buy one pair of shoes, we give one away. Such a simple model, and I actually love the simplicity of it. And it makes sense, someone doesn't have shoes, but now we think, is that a symptom or a root cause? Because if you ask one question, why do they not have shoes? We haven't asked that, right? We're just giving a pair of shoes away. That's what the company. So over time, by doing this model, they realized that one is that they weren't addressing a root cause. Two, they were actually negatively impacting local shoemakers and the shoe industry in these areas by giving something of value away for free. Over time, luckily, they had a growth mindset, and they realized that now we don't want to be part of the problem by just continuing to put a band-aid on something and not understand why. The root cause of poverty is much more complicated than a lack of shoes, right? And that's what we're getting into: unhoused, poverty, whatever those deeper issues are, and they're very contextual to a region, right? So then they started doing something which I think was more responsible, is using that extra, the buy one, the give was to donate to organizations locally that were working on those issues, the root cause of those issues. So it was still a buy one give model, but it wasn't the one for one, which they started off with, which was very sexy and cool to start off with, buy one give one. But they realized that over time that is not impacting. We're not seeing over time that people need less shoes. So that means whatever we're doing is addressing a symptom and not a root cause, And so I think that's a wonderful example of a company that was in magazines. They were, just lauded. They were so, because their model was so clear, and people felt good, right? Like they felt good. I'm buying this pair of shoes. They're giving it away. But over time, we realized that there was a bit of a fallacy there, and that was it invited a deeper inquiry, and just asking a few questions of why could have, helped them reach that. So
From the point of view of an entrepreneur who has been on this journey of finding the whys and the root cause, oftentimes it's not necessary that your own life has manifested in a very dramatic way that is naturally engaging to narrate to somebody, that is naturally having that flare of tension that's going to have the effectiveness of the storytelling. How can somebody who does not have that create a story, um, to be able to communicate most effectively his journey through the whys, but also feel that he's being true to himself? Are there any slots that you need to fill perhaps in a structure that make that communication happen seamlessly and in a more convincing way? And how do you actually identify with it when it's not actually what happened?
yeah, I love that because I think this is where sometimes we cannot see it in ourselves. We have these blinders on. We think that there's nothing here. This is boring. My life, it doesn't have. But if we work with someone or a storyteller or someone that can help, they may ask us those questions of why, jot some notes down, and tell our story back to us. So I really feel like this is where two entrepreneurs or two people, I would say, tell each other stories. Like, make your pitch and then say, now you make my pitch, because they may see something that you don't have. So in this way, maybe if you think your story is boring, go to your friend and then like say, this is my story, now you tell it to me as though you're me, because then you can hear it as a third person. We feel we sometimes discount ourselves. So and then there are structures. So there's a great structure, like um, the founders, I think, of South Park have a video on YouTube. You can look this up, but they kind of say, you say this happened, um, but then this happened, so then this happened. And it seems so simple. It seems like so idiotically simple, but it's so effective, because let's say you are trying to get a job and you're going for an interview, and you studied basket weaving, and now you're looking for, and then afterwards you I don't know, you got some experience, and now you now are looking for a role that's in a completely different industry, maybe the aerospace industry, right? And these two disparate points seem like, how will you ever bridge that gap to make yourself credible? You could say, well, I started basket weaving, but then I realized this wasn't the challenge that I thought it was going to be. So then I thought, I do have these great skills of being able to spot patterns because I created these baskets. And so then I thought, let me try this in another setting. But then, and so then I got a job in, I don't know, in some other field. But then I realized, no, I'm not getting challenged enough. And so I thought, I picked up my first book on aerospace. Um, but then I thought, reading a book is not enough. I need to be in the. So you can see these two, we're starting to bridge that gap. We're starting to get from these two very unlikely spaces. So I think sometimes if we don't see the story ourselves, we might need to go to someone else and get some help on that perspective. And AI might be actually a helpful way to do this, because we can write it out as a jumble of thoughts and just say, now give me three versions of this that are story, and you can see what is authentic, what makes sense. We don't want to conflate something but really, this is all of um, experience, is taking some sets of, even I think the great fiction that we read or the great movies that we see, it's not often, if you were to sum it up in 2 lines, it doesn't sound interesting. But over 2 hours, they may have given you parts of the ending first, and then they might have jumbled a few things up. But it's probably a very simple thing, whether it's a horror, movie, or an action adventure movie. You could probably distill it down into 2 lines, but then it's their compelling way, their format, their how of telling that story that maybe keeps us on the hook the whole time, at the edge of our seat. So I think we might discount ourselves by thinking that our own stories cannot follow something interesting, because they absolutely can. And this is where just finding some simple structures and storytelling techniques can help us, um, you know, form that compelling narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I was using the term that things happen non-linearly, but I didn't mean it non-linearly, because of course things are happening linearly, but in a fragmented way. So, because storytelling in films, as you mentioned, they happen non-linearly. Sometimes you have the ending first, there is some cold open or something like that. But they are tied with causality. Like eventually, you'll find a causal chain running through the scenes. There is a point after which everything is causal. So perhaps we need to find out in our own story what those causal things are, and how to make them interesting, how to align them in a way that is actually creating that tension where people want to know what happened next, because eventually
Yes.
they have a stake in the eventual output. So we need to make them feel that they have a stake in that.
Yeah, and maybe if there's something that we are seeking, and that's why we're telling the story, I might suggest an activity of starting with the outcome that you want, like starting with that and then telling the story backwards, telling your own life story, because then you will naturally make it persuasive to reach that outcome. And maybe that is the truth. We don't know, but maybe in our mind we haven't allowed ourselves or connected those dots. But if you start with the job you wanted, the place you wanted to live, the school you wanted, and you start with that and then tell the story backwards, and it might help reveal some of those connection points.
Yeah, indeed. And this actually reminds me of your work as a children's author. Do you think it speaks to this by using storytelling to help children kind of recognize themselves in stories and seamlessly carry the values that they learn there forward? I would really like you to delve a little more into how you engage children using storytelling, and what effects were you expecting? What were you thinking about it?
Yeah, I think in this way, story has become a container and a vehicle to be able to talk about problem solving, to be able to empower young people, young kids to see themselves as problem solvers because it it abstracts it. It's not, a learning lesson. It's about these characters doing this thing, and having this experience. And then I think we're able to explore something in a more kind of playground or sandbox kind of way because we have abstracted it. So I think it's and actually, from the first book I wrote, 51 Questions on Social Entrepreneurship, which is written for adults, I would say it took a different discipline to write a kid's book because the concepts are fairly sophisticated. It's what we do in Impactathon, but now we are trying to do it through images, pictures, words that are simple and a storyline that is simple. So I feel like um, it created a new kind of challenge. How do you tell this as a story but keep it simple, but still use that to illustrate the topics, the characteristics, the friendships, all those things that we want to be able to discuss or have them model afterwards by solving a real problem or or kind of pitching something themselves. So yeah, I think the storytelling, the I read a lot of children. I had never imagined myself writing children books. I read a lot of books. I watched some different masterclass sessions and storytelling sessions online. And some of those things did play into my into the way I wrote the story. Like in the first book, they have to identify their superpower by the end of the week. And even that idea, I don't think I had by the end of the week. And as I started learning about story, giving something a finite timeline creates tension, right? Um, in like like let's say in movies like The Hangover, they have they have to get to this wedding. They have to get moving. Like it's if they didn't have to get somewhere, it probably wouldn't be that interesting of a movie, right? But they have this thing that they're late. They have to go. So I think similarly, by creating something that's time bound is a wonderful way to quickly create tension and a common sense of, hey, we need to resolve this by a certain time. Like we don't have all day. We don't have all time. So that was something that I was able to integrate. Also, in the first book, as I was reading kids' books, I liked some of the methods where someone tries something and they fail, and they try something and they fail, and they try. So we're going with them as a reader, and we are starting to feel the tension of failing over and over again. Something's not working, and then they get some mentorship. What and they think, well, what if we try it another way? Will it work? I don't know. Let's try. So that was in the first book. I used that kind of um, that system of like, yeah, and then the second book they asked why multiple times and they tried something to work. So I think some of these things we are it gives us a way, and for kids too, they feel this in school. They have tried, as a kid you're always trying things and failing, whether you learn how to walk, through a million falls. So I think it's been neat to see as we do book readings that kids are so like we cannot underestimate kids because they're incredible and they're thinking in so many different levels. And so sometimes it's so interesting to see what a child has picked up from a story because they may say something that we didn't even expect, but they're interpreting it or relating it to their own experience in a creative way. So I think that's the joy of, I think, working with kids, is that it's so unpredictable how they will receive and reflect on stories, and how they'll kind of articulate it in their own words. So
When you were talking about this, I was wondering if it was more difficult for you to write for kids, or was it more difficult for you to write for adults? Especially when what we have today is Generation Alpha, and they are digital natives. Basically, they are more their experience of life is quite, not as, I would say, organic. It's quite synthetic. I also wanted to know what your predictions for the future of business storytelling is for Generation Alpha, and what factors
yeah.
do you think is going to really inform that?
Yeah, I get a little sneak peek when I see my nephews who are much younger when I started the books and now are, are 9 and 12, and I can see they are kind of squarely in that Gen Alpha um, generation, and I can see that there is a lot of um, like a critical view or like a skepticism, like about, oh, this is AI. They will spot it in a second, even when I haven't spotted it in a video. This is AI. So and around that, it's not necessarily like I think we look at AI and think, wow, this is so cool. Like there is this little, so I feel like that skepticism, we may see it woven in the way that they receive business storytelling. Like anything that, if the vibe is off or if it doesn't feel authentic, I think they may call that out much more quickly. So some of these marketing, I don't know. So I feel like some of the marketing programs that are so, I don't know, they're so formulaic and they have a certain uh, a way that they are trying to be persuasive that is kind of over the top. I mean, it must be working because there are so many programs like that. But I wonder if Gen Alpha will kind of see through that. That may not be the way to tell the story to them, because there may be just more inherent skepticism, and also they're young at a time when the geopolitical like framing is that so divisive, right? Like you can say a word and someone has made 100 assumptions about your belief system, like what party you believe, and so I think I wonder how that will affect them because there's not as much common ground, and so there just may be some kind of base level of like you have to prove it to them. You have to earn like their trust in a different way, but I feel like there's a practical nature to the Gen Alpha as well. So I think it'll be interesting to see, how this generation grows up, how they tell stories, how they receive stories, and then like how they want to make impact and all of that, and what they maybe the way pitching is will be different, because their needs will be different and what they want to hear and know about and share will be different too. So
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, now I come to my final question. What is one key takeaway that you want people to take from today's episode?
yeah, I would say in the simplest way, I would say, we are all storytellers. Like, and I think sometimes we don't believe that or we don't kind of see it, but I think we're all storytellers and we're all active listeners in stories. So both ways we should feel empowered to do that well, to be a storyteller, to get help when we need it, to try saying a story a different way, not to just say, okay, well, this is whatever, it's not that great, it's not, so be empowered. But even as listeners, that we can be empowered to ask more or ask something of our storytellers. So I think in the simplest way, just that understanding of ourselves as in those roles is transformative, can be transformative.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Neetal. This has been an absolute honor and really eye opening because I was really concerned that day that I didn't know this person. 1.5 hours spent with a person, and I am almost convinced to spend $1,500 on him. Now I know exactly what to look for. I'm going to give it some really deep thought. I hope people watching this would do the same and really live a life which is full of value and most authentic to ourselves and to everybody we care about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vedant. So wonderful to speak with you, and thanks for sharing your story that catalyzed this whole discussion on storytelling. So
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Neetal. Thanks a lot. Thank you.